If you become homeless in the state of Florida, your chances of dying are unbelievably high.
Was the person who committed the murder. Allegedly, the victim continued on a normal basis to in the presence of the other people in the homeless camp. Suspect here didn't appreciate that and really didn't appreciate that he was doing it in front of ladies, so...
For setting another man on fire at an Oldsmar homeless camp.
Former Hialeah police officers, they are accused of beating a homeless man.
But instead of taking Gutierrez to jail, the two former policemen took him to an isolated area and beat him.
A homeless man was shot to death in Hialeah.
A 58-year-old homeless man.
An innocent man laying just sleeping. Why would you just walk up to somebody and shoot and kill them that way?
It looks like it's been hit by a car.
A homeless man shot and killed last night.
Pinellas County Sheriff's Office said deputies responded to this area, 13-foot alligator. Deputies also recovered a person's remains from the water, later identified by law enforcement as 41-year-old Sabrina Peckham.
Floating in a pond, it was located deep in the woods, is indeed a homicide.
Found the lifeless victim near a homeless camp.
Charged with murdering two homeless people on the streets of Miami-Dade County.
After two people were killed, two people experiencing homelessness.
Duenas, his body was found.
Victim made unwanted gestures.
Duenas died a violent death. Martin County authorities say this is surveillance video.
The real estate agent by day and by night.
Homeless individuals for apparent no reason have been brutally targeted.
A serial killer whose victims are all homeless.
Martin County, Florida claims to have 250 homeless people, but in the last year, 2 of them have been found dead in homeless camps. We visited the site where one of these people was murdered in Martin County. The reason this victim was murdered was because he was making advances on other homeless people and they retaliated. The same exact thing happened in Polk County, where Sheriff Grady Judd talked about a person called Mexico who killed somebody at a homeless camp because he was doing the same behavior. And it seems like these assaults are so prevalent among homeless camps that it's a leading cause for many of the homicides. Discreetly off camera, I've been asking the females whom we interview for our channel if they've experienced this type of behavior, and it seems that within the first year of homelessness, it is almost guaranteed that a female will eventually be victimized. In Florida, in the first year, 100 out of 100 females that are homeless will be victimized. It's guaranteed to happen. Martin County, Florida reports 250 homeless people. Over the last year, 2 have been killed. That means that 1.25 out of every 100 people that are homeless in Martin County, Florida are a victim of a homicide. In Bradenton, Florida, I visited a homeless camp in Manatee County where there were 24 people. Out of those 24 people, over the last year, 2 of them have died. That brings the mortality rate for this particular homeless camp to 8 out of 100 dying on a yearly basis. At this rate, in 12 years, all of these homeless people would have died. The causes of death vary greatly, from alligator attacks, car accidents, overdoses, and of course homicides. However, the leading cause of death for the homeless seems to be the inhumane living conditions that they have, leading to medical complications like gangrene, pneumonia, infections that eventually lead to the death of these individuals, deaths that can be easily prevented if they had better access to medical care, or simply more sanitary living conditions. As we have seen at the start of our video, law enforcement officers constantly deprive the homeless population of due process, many times kidnapping and beating the homeless people to extract from them whatever they want. In my personal experience, I have had 4 homeless people tell me that at some point or another, they've been kidnapped by law enforcement officers. Many times when law enforcement officers do not want the homeless people in a particular place, they go outside of the limitations of the law, outside of due process, depriving these people from their freedom and taking them somewhere else involuntarily. But even more common is law enforcement officers who kidnap people who are homeless and hold them until they provide information on a serious crime that took place in the area. These types of kidnappings are very common among the homeless population, and I have seen reports of this happening in Brevard, Polk, Lee, and Charlotte counties, as well as in the Tampa area, where law enforcement will grab a homeless person and kidnap them until they provide information on a crime in the area. Fortunately, in some counties, it's a normal thing for the police to go to these homeless camps and keep the homeless population there kind of captive until they provide information on a crime. To note, particularly in Charlotte County, Florida, it's just about common practice for law enforcement to go into these homeless camps, kidnap the people there, and tell them that if somebody doesn't have information or if somebody in the homeless camp doesn't fess up to the crime, in other words, somebody has to pretend like they committed the crime and turn themselves in for the crime, that way they can arrest a suspect for a particular crime, then everybody in that homeless camp is forced to leave or they're all arrested for trespassing. Thus, this is a sort of extortion from law enforcement to quickly close or resolve cases through methods that are completely illegal. Thus, if you become homeless in Florida, it wouldn't be out of the realm of normality for law enforcement to come to your homeless camp and tell you that you have to become guilty of a crime that you didn't commit and accept responsibility for that crime, or you're going to be arrested for trespassing. Many times, you don't really have an option. You either have to say who did it, bring somebody forth, make an accusation against somebody, or you yourself will have to take that charge. Basically, law enforcement officers are working outside of due process to bring forth perpetrators for crimes, whether they committed the crime or not. Their goal is just to find a resolution to make an arrest for the theft, so that when certain people make a complaint to law enforcement, they're under the perception that these law enforcement agencies have the miraculous power to find suspects out of nowhere with incredible technology and incredible police abilities. But in reality, they're just going outside of due process and forcing somebody to take a charge for a crime they didn't commit to save face. The absolute worst offender, Miami-Dade County, where business owners, law enforcement, and even people like real estate developers just outright kill homeless people if they're in the wrong areas. Perhaps you've wondered why some areas of Miami have absolutely no homeless presence visible, and that is because they'll outright kill the homeless people if they go into certain areas. As I go to these homeless camps, I've recently been asking people how many people live in this homeless camp and how many of them have died over the last few years, and it seems like some counties like Manatee, Pasco, Brevard, Volusia, the percentage of the homeless population who dies in these camps over a 1-year period is sometimes as close as 10%. Overall, different causes of death for many different reasons, but the fact remains the same. If you are homeless in the state of Florida over a 5-year period, you have a 50% chance of dying. Now, this information is information that I have compiled myself. You're not going to find any agency that's going to tell you the mortality rate of homeless people in the state of Florida. But of all the work I've done, I've always tried to get some type of analytical information off the top of people's heads. Sometimes I've even done this on camera so you guys can see the stories from the homeless people. And the reality is, if you were to become homeless in the state of Florida over a 5-year period, you would have a chance of dying of roughly 50%. 50 out of 100 homeless people in the state of Florida die after a 5-year period. Now, the overdose death rate in the state of Florida is 37 people out of every 100,000. However, 95 out of 100 homeless people in the state of Florida that I have encountered are self-admitted users. Most of these users being heavily addicted. The percentage of the population in the United States that is heavily addicted varies greatly from one source to the next, but it's believed that about 8% of the Caucasian population in the United States uses on a monthly basis. Of course, not all of those people are heavily addicted. When you look at the homeless population, about 90% are heavily addicted. Some official estimates put it as high as 87%. In my case, with my studies that I have done on the ground, only about 1 in 20 homeless people doesn't seem to be a very heavy user. And many times when I interview homeless people and they tell you guys on video that they are not users, as soon as I finish the interviews, they run straight to the dope spots, which lets me know that they were lying. I would have to say that nearly 95% of the population that is homeless in the state of Florida, at least in the counties that I've dealt with, are users. Now, the homicide rate in the state of Florida is something like 7 people out of every 100,000. But in these homeless camps, I'm finding that the homeless homicide rate is somewhere between 250 to 975 people per every 100,000. Thus, when you become homeless in Florida, you are 140 times more likely to be the victim of a homicide than anybody else in the population. Just like you're more likely to be a victim of a homicide, you're also much more likely to be a victim of an overdose death. And just like you're considerably more likely to be the victim of a homicide, you're also considerably more likely to be a victim of an overdose. And you still have an onslaught of circumstances that are leading to the mortality of the homeless people that just don't happen to normal people at the same rate. For one, alligator attacks comes to mind. You have infections and diseases. You have living conditions that lead to deteriorated health and eventually lead to people's lives ending early. It would really be impossible to give you accurate numbers on these leading causes of death for the homeless, but in the state of Florida in particular, it is astounding. And even if there were official analytics from the state on the leading cause of death for the homeless, the state is so complicit in the causes of these deaths that it is likely, most likely than anything, that there would be some type of information manipulation to covertly cover up the real reason why these homeless people are dying. After all, we're talking about law enforcement officers being one of the main reasons why the homeless people are dying in the state of Florida, because they prefer to work outside of due process. I mean, in the Tampa area, we're hearing stories of outright homicides being committed by law enforcement and then forcing the medical examiners to pass these off as overdoses, or making up some crazy story about how it was, an injury or something, or a car accident or a hit and run. There's so many ways that these atrocious behaviors from law enforcement are just being written off as accidents, that it really leaves a question mark to if law enforcement or any government agency were to release mortality information about how homeless people are dying in Florida, what type of credibility this information could have. But at the end of the day, if you become homeless in the state of Florida, your chances of survival are a fraction. You are under a multiplier effect. Your chances of living after years of homelessness on the streets of Florida, you're going to become a relic and a rare item. It is true that there's a lot of homeless people in Florida that have been homeless for decades in the state. But if you were to ask them what percentage of the homeless population that went on that journey with them are still here today, you'll find out that a considerable percentage of those people are gone. They are really the survivors. My advice to anybody facing homelessness in the state of Florida is to do everything in their power to remain housed. Because the moment that you become homeless, your life has no value. Law enforcement will never treat you like a human being ever again, and you'll be victimized constantly by law enforcement, criminals, and anybody who wants to take advantage of you will have the ability to do so. The moment you enter homelessness, you may not have plaguing addictions, but after years of homelessness, it is less than 10% of the population of those who are chronically homeless that are free from addictions to alcohol, illicit substances. Perhaps nobody has tried to take your life while being housed in a normal community, but when you find yourself living clandestinely on somebody else's land with many other people who are doing the same exact thing, your chances of becoming a homicide will increase dramatically. Your safety will no longer be what it was before. I meet a lot of homeless people who tell me that they feel safe in their homeless camps. However, the reality after looking at these analytical figures is that you are hundreds of times more likely to perish, and the mortality rate for the homeless people is astronomically higher than for anybody else in the population. Thus, you should do everything in your power to always have a place to live and to stay far away from the streets. Because in the state of Florida, the mortality rate for homeless people are numbers that are so shocking that the vast majority of us wouldn't even want to hear today's video. We know that this number is significant. We know these people are perishing at an alarming rate. Accidents, injuries, medical conditions, health complications, homicides, and of course, incidents like alligator attacks are plaguing the homeless population in Florida. Really, there isn't anybody tracking the rate at which these things are happening. But from my experience dealing with the homeless population in Florida, the percentage of the population that is dying from these causes is alarming. Even if you think you have the ability to control incidents with other homeless people, or you are free from addiction and feel like you have the willpower not to be on these substances, then you have the people that just randomly target the homeless people. You have the people that randomly victimize those who are most vulnerable. Whether you like to admit it or not, while being homeless, you are constantly a victim and a target of other people's aggression. Not only that, incidents that are out of your control, like access to healthcare and attacks from animals and countless other untold challenges that most of us cannot even relate to. This is the reality of being homeless in the state of Florida. So if you're seeing your economical situation diminish, you need to really devise an option out. Work more hours, save more money, become a roommate with somebody. You need to find a solution that keeps you off the streets, because your chances of survival once you find yourself in this situation are no joke. Many people believe that if they become homeless, they'll be free from obligations. They consider it a sense of freedom. They don't have to pay a rent. They don't have to pay bills. They think they're going to be free when they become homeless. And many homeless people even preach the message that they're happier than people that are housed. But it seems like in human nature, we always have a reason to validate our decisions or to try to excuse our shortcomings in life. And it doesn't seem reasonable that living in these conditions under so many dangers could even possibly relate to living a normal life. Despite the fact many homeless people preach that their lifestyle is even better than people that are housed or they're free from obligations, these are individuals who clearly have put very little effort into living a productive life. They're no longer giving society their best, but they're putting themselves in precarious situations, in environments that are completely detrimental to your health, mentally and physically. Being around people who are constantly engaging in criminal activity, many of these individuals have mental health problems combined with addiction, makes these people completely unpredictable. The varied afflictions of medical ailments that plague the homeless population is likely innumerable, and the analytics, because they're varied in so many ways, from health complications to animal attacks and all these strange types of mortalities, means that we're never really going to get a real number or a real estimate on how much of the homeless population is dying in all these strange ways. But we do know the following. We go to homeless camps where today there are 20 people, and you come back a year later and there's only going to be 18 of them. 2 of them would have died somehow or another. Then there's something even scarier and more alarming. Homeless people that just drop off the face of the earth. They're missing people. Nobody knows where they are. You talk to law enforcement, they don't know. You talk to homeless people, they don't know. These people have no families, no ties to anyone. They are missing people. They completely drop off the face of the earth. Nobody knows what happened to them, where they are. And yet these are the types of individuals that are unaccounted for. What is the number of those that are unaccounted for? People that just drop off the face of the earth. What happens to these homeless people? What is really happening to them? We've even seen cases where law enforcement in some counties have had police officers be the ones that harm these people. What do we know about what's really happening to these missing individuals that drop off the face of the earth and nobody sees them again? Did an alligator get them? Did somebody hurt them? What happened to these people? Where are they? This is the reality of homelessness in Florida. Absolutely a disgusting situation. You would think with all the resources that we have in the United States that people wouldn't have to live in these conditions. The lack of access to mental health care is a leading reason why these individuals end up in these situations. Others believe that addiction is safe. It's recreational for them. Really? The consequences of these lifestyles, individuals refuse to accept. Instead of saying addiction is harmful and it destroys your life, many people label it as recreational. They believe it's their right to be able to engage in these illegal activities that we as a society have made illegal for a reason. We as a society have decided that we don't want people to do this because we know it's harmful. But the individuals that engage in these activities would like to make you believe that they're recreational, they're harmless, they don't hurt anybody. And again, people are always going to find a way to excuse their shortcomings. Many people living on the streets will tell you themselves that it's completely their choice to live in that situation. Sadly, there are others who have health problems, both physical and mental, others who have been dealt really hard cards in life, and they find themselves in these situations not by choice, because if they could do anything to change their situation, they would. And I run into homeless people that tell me that they would do anything to get out of the situation they are in, but they're trapped in homelessness. Others will tell you that they're completely content living in these conditions since they don't want to have any type of debt or compromise or any contribution to society. There are varied reasons, and not every story is the same. Some people don't have a choice, other people do have a choice, but you at home do have a choice. Do everything you can to stay off these dangerous streets. Many times the chain of events that leads to homelessness doesn't happen immediately the day before you hit the streets. It's your ability to have good grades in school. It's your ability to stay away from illegal, harmful substances. It's the people that you choose to surround yourself with today that 5 or 6 years down the road could lead you to living in complete misery. See, the decisions that you make today may not have a lot of effect on the way you're living now, but many years down the road, the compelling effect of bad decisions, bad judgment, bad associations, and bad lifestyle choices will lead you down a path that will leave you being that victim, being that number. Many times I see people spending money on cars and clothes and gadgets and all types of recreational activities that are like throwing money in the toilet. Eventually, those bad decisions that you take economically can also lead to your homelessness. We've interviewed a lot of individuals who at one point in their life were very well materially, but it's not hard to squander even large sums of money. If you become homeless in the state of Florida, your chances of survival are diminished rapidly. Do everything you can to stay off the streets. There's two more things that almost always lead people to homelessness. One is engaging in criminal activity. At one point, your luck runs out, you go to prison, and when you come back out of prison, you have nothing to show for yourself. And it is true that there are individuals who one day have an accident and then they end up homeless. And that is a fairly common scenario as well. So if you do encounter homeless people, don't just assume that their decisions brought them to that circumstance. A lot of people really were people like me and you. And one day after an accident or an unforeseen event, their entire life flipped upside down. And these individuals don't deserve to be treated like the other homeless people who are there by choice. As I interview my homeless people, and at this point I'm sure I've interviewed over 100 homeless people, many of them tell me that they work. They want to make me believe that they work. Others want to make me believe that they're not addicted. However, if you spend enough time around these individuals, you'll see that they are addicted and that they don't have a lot of desire to work. But they want to make you believe that they do, because after all, they know that those are the reasons why people refuse to help the homeless, because it's a self-inflicted ailment for some, but it's an unfortunate thing for others. This is Homelessness in Florida. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video.